Here's how it started for me. A 70-year-old dad in Asheville, pouring coffee in my quiet kitchen, when my daughter-in-law walked in, jingled my spare keys, and said, "Hand over the house keys." When I refused, she slapped me. My own son stared at the floor like none of it mattered. I felt the sting, sure, but I've lived long enough to count to 3 before I speak, while they laughed off my silence. I opened the safe that night and pulled out what they didn't know I had. The original deed, my late wife's clause protecting me, and a trust I'd set up with my lawyer. Tomorrow, when the bailiff says all rise, one envelope will decide whose name this house carries, hers or mine. If you want to hear how it ends, stay with me and tell me the city you're watching from. I woke to the creak of old floorboards, the sound I'd grown so used to in this house that it had become part of my mornings. The air still carried a trace of lilac from the bush my late wife planted by the porch. I made my coffee, black and strong, and settled into the chair by the window where sunlight always spilled first. Retirement had given me time, but time often pressed heavy when spent in silence. Every corner of this place held memory, her laughter in the kitchen, the steady hum of our life together. I'd always thought I'd finish my days here, surrounded by those echoes. The knock at the door startled me. It was firm, too quick. I rose, setting down my mug, and when I opened the door, Jody stood there, smile polished, eyes sharp. "Morning, Orville," she said, stepping in as if she owned the place. She didn't wait for me to offer, just crossed the threshold, her perfume clashing with the smell of coffee and wood. The air shifted immediately. I followed her into the living room. "Didn't expect company this early," I said lightly, though a coil of unease tightened in my gut. Jody looked around, her gaze lingering on the framed photos on the mantel, my wife holding Darren as a boy, me in my uniform back when my back was straight and strong. She reached into her purse, pulled out a ring of keys that jingled like a warning bell. She let them dangle from her fingers, swaying slightly. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice casual but lined with something else. "This place could use a little rearranging. Fresh start. New order." Her eyes flicked toward the dining table, then to the hallway, as if she were already planning what walls to paint, what furniture to move. The sound of those keys filled the room louder than her words. My chest tightened. That ring looked too much like the set I'd given Darren years ago, just in case of emergencies. My house had always been open to family, but suddenly it felt less like generosity and more like surrender. I steadied my breath. "Rearranging, huh? This house has stood just fine the way it is. Every corner's got history in it. That's worth more than any new curtain or rug." Jody smiled thinly, slipping the keys back into her purse with a snap. "History doesn't keep the lights on," she said. My mind wandered back to the nights I'd worked double shifts to pay the mortgage, the promises I'd whispered to my wife that I'd keep this place safe for the family. I felt a crack open inside me, not anger yet, just the weight of something unspoken, pressing down. The front door opened again, and Darren walked in. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but when his eyes met mine, he quickly looked away. Jody moved to him, her hand brushing his arm, her voice suddenly sweet. "Honey, I was just telling your dad this house needs some changes. He can't keep up with everything." Her words stung. I glanced at Darren, waiting for him to say something, anything, to soften the blow. Instead, he stayed quiet, his jaw tightening as though silence was easier than truth. "Forgetful," Jody added, almost as if it were a kindness. "He leaves the door unlocked, misplaces things. He needs supervision." The word hit me like a slap. Supervision, as if I were a child, not the man who'd raised her husband, not the one who'd carried this family through hard winters and hospital bills. I turned to Darren, my voice even, though heat rushed to my face. "Is that what you think too, son? That I need watching?" He shifted on his feet, eyes still down. No answer. That silence was louder than Jody's voice, louder than the keys jingling earlier. It was the silence of betrayal, quiet but cutting deep. The room felt smaller. I drew in a breath, forcing calm. I may misplace a tool in the shed, but I've kept this house standing for 40 years. Don't confuse age with weakness. Jody laughed lightly, brushing her hand along the back of the couch. No one's saying weakness. Orville, we just want to make sure things are handled, you know, responsibly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I tried again, steady but firm. Why do the keys suddenly matter so much? Jody, she tilted her head, feigning surprise. Matter? Oh, they don't. Just convenience. She waved a hand dismissively, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Darren shifted again, glancing at me for a brief moment before dropping his gaze. My son, the boy who once followed me like a shadow in the yard, couldn't look me in the eye. That hurt more than her words. I leaned back in my chair, the worn armrest familiar under my hand. My heart ached, but I steadied it. Convenience can be a dangerous word, I said quietly. Especially when it comes to family. The room fell into uneasy quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, each second heavier than the last. Jody picked up her purse, slung it over her shoulder. We'll talk more later, she said with finality, her tone leaving no room for debate. She turned toward the door, but as she moved, I saw it, her hand slipping my own set of keys from the table. Sliding them into her purse in one smooth motion, Darren stood frozen, his face pale, but he said nothing, not a word. I gripped the arm of my chair tighter, the fabric bunching beneath my fingers. My chest tightened, not from age, not from weariness, but from the sharp realization that betrayal often speaks loudest in silence. That night, after Jody slipped my keys into her purse, I barely closed my eyes. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with the headlights that passed outside. The silence of the house. Once my comfort, pressed down like a weight. My wife used to say silence could heal, but this was different. This silence had teeth. When morning came, I shuffled to the window and pulled the curtain back. Asheville's hills looked the same under the soft orange light, yet the house felt altered, as if someone had shifted its bones while I slept. The smell of bacon reached me before I stepped into the kitchen. Jody was already there, moving with a confidence that gnawed at me. She stood at the stove like it was her rightful place, humming a tune under her breath. My coffee pot, the one I'd used for years, sat filled and waiting, yet not by my hand. She glanced at me over her shoulder, smile polished, eyes assessing. Morning? Orville? She said, sliding eggs onto a plate as though she were hostess of some inn. I sat down slowly, fingers tracing the worn wood of the table. You're up early, I said. Someone has to keep this house running, she answered lightly, though the words carried a sting. She set a plate in front of me without asking if I was hungry. I noticed Darren entering behind her, tie loose, eyes tired. He kissed her cheek absent-mindedly, but he didn't meet my gaze. That silence from him stung sharper than the bacon grease popping on the pan. After a few moments, Jody wiped her hands on a towel, then walked over and stopped in front of me. She extended her palm, steady, authoritative. Orville, she said firmly, I need your house keys. Hand them over. Her tone left no room for pleasantries. My heart knocked against my ribs, but I reached into my pocket, feeling the cool weight of the keys against my fingers. Those keys weren't just metal, they were the proof of my independence, the symbol of every hour I'd worked to keep this roof overhead. My wife and I had promised each other we'd never let this house slip away, no matter what it cost us. I looked up slowly, meeting Jody's eyes. These keys don't belong to you, I said evenly. She didn't flinch. They belong to whoever takes care of this house, and right now, that's me. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her fingers wiggled slightly, urging me to drop them in her hand. Darren shifted behind her, his gaze fixed on the floor. I searched his face for courage, for loyalty, but he stayed still, silent as stone. I closed my fist tighter around the keys. I built this life, brick by brick. Don't confuse generosity with surrender. Jody's jaw tightened, but she masked it with a smile. Stubbornness doesn't look good on a man your age, she said. Then she turned, brushing past Darren. We'll talk again. I sat there long after she left the room, the keys burning in my palm. Darren poured himself coffee quietly, still not looking at me. I wanted to shake him, to remind him of the nights I carried him upstairs half asleep, the mornings I drove him to practice before my own shift. But his silence said enough. He had chosen where he stood. Later that day, I walked through the living room, trying to steady myself. My eyes roamed the walls, lined with decades of memories framed in glass. That's when I stopped cold. The portrait, the one of my wife and me on our 30th anniversary, holding hands, smiles soft with time, it was gone. In its place hung a newer picture. Darren and Jody with their daughter, Kelsey. My face, my presence, erased with the careful choice of a nail and hook. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. It wasn't just a photo missing, it was a declaration. I touched the empty spot where our portrait once hung, fingertips brushing the lighter square of paint. "So this is how it is," I whispered. My throat ached, but no tears came. Instead, a calm clarity settled in, sharp as glass. I searched the room, and in the corner, half hidden behind a cabinet, I spotted the frame. I bent down, knees protesting, and pulled it free. The glass was cracked, the edge splintered. My wife's smile looked back at me through shards, fractured yet unbroken. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me to see it like this, to feel it. I held the frame to my chest, the weight heavier than it should have been. "They want to erase me," I said quietly, almost to her spirit lingering in the room. "But I'm still here." The decision hung in the air. I could confront them now, raise my voice, demand respect, or I could wait. Watch. Let their arrogance reveal itself. My wife always believed patience was strength, not weakness. Her voice echoed in my mind. "Pick your moment. Make it count." So I slid the broken portrait back into the shadows, hiding the evidence of their carelessness. My heart steadied. If they wanted a war of silence, I would fight on my terms. As evening crept in, I sat alone in my chair, the house dim around me. I traced the crack in the glass with my thumb, each jagged line a reminder. This wasn't just thoughtless neglect, it was a warning. That shattered frame told me the truth. I wasn't simply being ignored, I was being erased. I barely slept after finding that shattered portrait tucked away behind the cabinet. The broken glass glimmered in my mind's eye all night, like shards of truth cutting deeper with every thought. When dawn came, I moved slowly down the hallway, each creak of the old floorboards reminding me this was still my house, or at least, it used to be. From the kitchen drifted muffled voices, sharp edges hidden beneath hushed tones. I stopped just short of the doorway and leaned against the wall. Jody's voice carried first. "We need to move things along. Darren, he's dragging his feet." My son's reply was low, uncertain. "I don't want to fight. If giving her the keys keeps peace, then maybe it's for the best." The words sank into me heavier than stone. He didn't say our peace or his father's comfort. He said hers. My chest tightened, each beat echoing like betrayal itself. The boy I raised, the man who once swore to me he'd protect this home after I was gone, was trading away that promise in whispers. Jody's laugh followed, soft and smug. "Good. Once he's out of the way, we can finally do what should have been done years ago." My knuckles pressed white against the wall. Every fiber in me wanted to storm in, to slam my fist on the table and remind them both of the sacrifices buried in these walls. But I didn't move. I stayed still, invisible in my own home, letting their words carve deeper. It was no longer just Jody's scheming that cut me open. It was Darren's cowardice. By late morning, the house buzzed with artificial warmth. Jody laid out a brunch as though nothing had been said, plates of muffins and fruit arranged neatly. I sat at the table, watching every detail, my ears still burning from the earlier betrayal. That's when Byron, the neighbor, strolled in through the open door with casual ease. Jody greeted him like family, waving him to sit down. My eyes narrowed. He pulled out a chair, not just any chair, but mine, the seat where I had read newspapers, dozed off after long shifts, and shared coffee with my late wife, my place. Without hesitation, Byron lowered himself into it, adjusting as though it had always belonged to him. I looked around. expecting anyone, to correct it. Darren said nothing, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on his plate. Jody beamed, pleased, encouraging the theft without a single word. That simple act stung worse than the missing portrait. It wasn't just furniture, it was the slow, deliberate erasure of me. I cleared my throat. That's my chair. My voice came steady but heavy. Byron chuckled lightly, oblivious. Oh, didn't realize. Feels comfortable, though, hope you don't mind. Jody chimed in before I could respond. Oh, Orville, don't be so particular. It's just a chair. Let's all be flexible. Her tone dripped with false sweetness, but the message was acid. I forced a smile, thin and brittle, and leaned back in another seat. My body stayed still, but inside I boiled. They had taken my portrait, my keys, and now even my chair, piece by piece. They were cutting away the spaces where I belonged. I stared at Darren across the table. He wouldn't lift his eyes. His silence screamed louder than any insult. As conversation carried on, Jody laughing at Byron's stories, Darren nodding along, I sat in that foreign seat, tasting humiliation with every bite of cold muffin. My mind wandered back through decades, nights spent repairing this roof myself, hours doubled at work to pay off the mortgage, promises whispered to my wife as we planned to grow old here together. All of it led to this table, where my son couldn't even defend my place in my own home. I clenched the table's edge, nails digging into the wood. I thought of my wife's steady voice telling me patience was not weakness but strategy. Timing mattered. She would have reminded me that eruptions burn out quickly, but slow fire consumes everything. I swallowed my fury, burying it deep. But in that silence, I made a vow. This would not go on unchecked. If they thought I would fade quietly into the background, they had underestimated me. I looked at Darren's bowed head, then at Jody's triumphant smile, and whispered under my breath, low enough for only myself to hear, if even my chair can be taken. What will they take next? I sat at the table long after Byron left, my hand still pressed against the wood where I'd clenched it. My chair was gone, my portrait broken, and my son's silence louder than thunder. I breathed deeply, steadying myself, because anger without control only feeds those who want you weak. I straightened my back and turned toward Jody, who was still clearing plates with that smug smile etched on her face. Jody, I said evenly, keeping my voice calm, you've made yourself very comfortable here, but last I checked, this is still my house. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she tossed her hair back and let out a light laugh, dripping with condescension. Orville, you're too old-fashioned. Houses need new energy, new leadership. You've had your time. Darren shifted beside her, his eyes darting away from mine. The cowardice in his silence cut deeper than her words. Leadership? I repeated, leaning slightly forward. I built this roof, paid for it with sweat, with hours you'll never count. Leadership doesn't vanish with age, it deepens. Jody's lips curled into a sneer. You sound like a man clinging to relics. Old men forget their place. Maybe it's time you learned yours. The air in the room thickened, Kelsey's fork pausing midway to her mouth. My granddaughter looked between us, her wide eyes begging for peace. My jaw tightened. Her insult wasn't just words, it was a strike aimed at my very being. You should watch your tongue, I replied slowly, every syllable measured. Disrespect has a way of echoing back. Jody smirked, stepping closer. Echoes fade. What matters is the present, and right now, your authority means nothing. The words hit like poison. They weren't loud, but they carried enough venom to burn through my patience. I could feel the weight of every sacrifice mocked in that one sentence. My son still said nothing, his silence granting her the stage to humiliate me further. Then it happened. Her hand shot out, swift and deliberate, slapping my face so hard my head turned with the impact. The sound cracked through the room like lightning. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Darren stared at the floor, shame shackling his voice. Kelsey gasped, her small hands clutching the edge of her chair. I placed my palm slowly against the burning skin of my cheek. The sting was sharp, but it wasn't the real wound. The deeper cut came from Darren, my own flesh and blood, who couldn't summon the courage to defend me. The silence that followed pressed heavier than the slap itself. Jody stood tall, her chest rising with pride as though she had won something. She tilted her head and whispered, "See. Power changes hands, whether you like it or not." I looked at her, then at my son, and finally at my granddaughter. I spoke softly, but with the weight of every year in my voice. "You think a slap erases a lifetime? You think silence rewrites truth? You're mistaken." Jody rolled her eyes and turned away, but her victory was hollow. She wanted me broken, yet all she revealed was her own cruelty. Inside, I felt something shift. The humiliation was real, but so was the clarity it brought. I had endured insults before, but never had anyone laid a hand on me in my own home. That line, once crossed, could never be unseen. I sat there, steady, refusing to crumble. I thought of my late wife, of the promises we made within these walls. This house carried our story, our legacy, and my name was still etched into every beam and brick. They could steal chairs, break portraits, and even raise their hands against me, but erasing me would never be so simple. I slipped my hand into my pocket, brushing against the small, cold outline of my safe key. My heart steadied. They wanted my house, my history, my dignity. But what lay locked away would remind them that I was not so easily erased. Evening settled over the house with a weight I couldn't shake. The sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. I sat at the dining table, the same spot where humiliation had burned across my cheek hours earlier, and the sting lingered like a scar beneath the skin. Every clink of silverware echoed louder than it should have, because no one dared to speak. Dinner wasn't a meal anymore. It was a battlefield where silence cut sharper than knives. Kelsey pushed peas across her plate, her small shoulders tense, eyes darting up at me, then back down again. I gave her a faint smile, trying to soften the air, but the girl was too young to carry this kind of tension. Across from me, Darren stared into his food as though it might give him courage, but courage wasn't on the menu. Jody sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her smirk barely hidden. She looked as if she'd already won something I hadn't agreed to surrender. I lifted my fork slowly, every motion deliberate, because control was all I had left. I chewed without tasting, thinking about how a man's home could feel less like shelter and more like a cage once respect was stripped away. Halfway through the meal, Jody set her fork down with a deliberate clatter. The noise snapped through the air, pulling everyone's gaze. She leaned forward, folding her hands on the table as if presiding over a meeting. "Orville," she said, her tone chilled and certain. "Let's not drag this out. The house keys. It's time you handed them over." I looked at her, then at Darren. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept his eyes on his plate. The cowardice burned hotter than the slap. My hand instinctively went to my pocket where the keys rested, metal edges pressing into my palm. "This house," I said evenly, "has stood longer than your marriage, longer than your claims. My name is built into its bones. Every nail, every brick, every memory belongs to me." Her lips curled into something cruel. "Names fade. Paperwork fades. What matters is who controls it now. You can't even manage your meals without help. It's time you let go before things get messy." "Messy?" I repeated, locking my eyes on hers. Messy was raising a family on a mill worker's wages. Messy was caring for a sick wife without complaint. Messy was making sure my son had every opportunity I never did. Don't you dare lecture me about messy. Her smile faltered for a breath, but only for a breath. Then she leaned back, smirk sharpening again. "You're clinging to ghosts. Orville. The world doesn't stop because an old man can't keep up." The words cut, but I didn't waver. My voice grew firmer. "You can sneer all you like, but I'm not handing over my keys. Not today, not ever." Kelsey gasped softly, her little fork slipping from her hand. Jody's eyes narrowed, the victory she thought she'd secured crumbling into frustration. She turned her gaze to Darren, her silent partner, expecting him to step in, to finish what she started. But Darren didn't. He sat there, motionless, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own silence. He couldn't even meet my eyes. That silence. It was worse than her insults, worse than the sting of her palm. My son, the boy I raised, the man I protected, chose silence when his father was under attack. "Darren," I said quietly, steady but with an edge that demanded an answer. "Do you have nothing to say?" His fork scraped against the plate as he pushed food around, still refusing to look up. The betrayal was complete, carved not with words, but with silence. I leaned back, letting the moment hang. My pride was wounded, my spirit bruised, but inside something hardened. A vow began to form, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I would not surrender my dignity, nor the keys, nor the home that bore my family's history. They could scheme, they could slap, they could twist their words into poison, but I would not hand them victory. The meal dragged on, but I hardly touched another bite. Jody kept glancing at me, irritation flickering in her eyes when I didn't yield. Darren's silence stretched longer, an unspoken confession of betrayal. Kelsey chewed slowly, her gaze flicking back and forth as though she were watching tectonic plates shift beneath her feet. When the plates were cleared and footsteps faded upstairs, I lingered at the table alone. The house groaned with the weight of memory, and I traced the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. This home carried my wife's laughter, the first steps of my son, the scent of Sunday dinners that once filled every corner, that couldn't be erased, not by Jody's schemes, not by Darren's cowardice. Later, in the quiet of my bedroom, I closed the door softly and turned the lock. The small click echoed like a promise. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the cool metal of my keys before pulling out the smaller one, the one that belonged to the safe. I held it in my palm, staring at it under the dim lamplight. "If they want war," I whispered to the silence, "I will not fight with fists. I will fight with truth." I slid the key back into my pocket, the weight of it anchoring me. The vow was sealed, not shouted, not declared, but carved deep within. They thought they were stripping me down. They didn't know they were only sharpening my resolve. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the slap again, not on my skin but deep in my chest. It wasn't about the sting, it was about the disrespect, the declaration that I no longer mattered in my own home. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned lazily above me, its blades whispering through the darkness like reminders of everything I had lost. When dawn finally came, pale light bleeding through the blinds, I knew I couldn't let another day pass without acting. I brewed a pot of coffee, the strong smell filling the kitchen. My hands shook slightly as I poured the cup, not from age but from anticipation. The vow I made the night before echoed in my head. I would not fight with fists, but with truth. That meant one thing. I needed help. I reached for the phone on the wall, its coiled cord stretched from years of use, and dialed Starkweather's office. When his secretary answered, I cleared my throat. "Tell him Orville needs him. Today, no delays." My voice was steady, though my heart raced. Within an hour, I was showered, dressed, and on my way downtown. The cold morning air cutting through my jacket like it was sharpening my resolve. Starkweather's office was nothing fancy, just a modest suite above a hardware store. But when I walked in, the sight of his old oak desk and the rows of law books brought me a kind of comfort. He stood to greet me, his handshake firm, his eyes steady. He had been my lawyer for decades, the one man I knew wouldn't treat me like an old fool. "Orville," he said, motioning for me to sit. "You don't look like a man coming for small talk." I lowered myself into the chair across from him, my back stiff with determination. "You're right. I need to know where I stand. My daughter-in-law is circling my house like a vulture, and my son, well, he doesn't have the backbone to stop her." Starkweather leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "You still hold the deed?" "Yes. Your will is locked up safe?" I nodded slowly. "In my house. Hidden. She doesn't know about it." "Then you have legal ground. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. he said firmly. His words carried weight, like stones dropped into water, steadying me. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope stirred in my chest. But just as the air began to lighten, Starkweather's expression darkened. He pulled a folder from the side of his desk, slid it toward me, and tapped the corner. "There's something you need to see. Word has reached me that your daughter-in-law is not waiting on patience or persuasion. She's preparing documents, false ones, forged papers that suggest you already transferred the house." I froze, my hand hovering above the folder. Forged? The word felt foreign in my mouth. He opened the folder to reveal copies of signatures, crude imitations of my own, my name, my very identity, scratched onto paper in someone else's hand. A fire lit in me, hotter than any slap or insult. "She would go that far?" I whispered. Starkweather's gaze held mine. "It seems so. She wants control. Orville. And she's willing to break the law to get it. That's why you came to me when you did. This isn't just about property. It's about your name. Your legacy." I leaned forward, my fingers pressing into the desk. "That house isn't just lumber and shingles. It's where my wife breathed her last. It's where I carried my boy when he was too small to walk. Every corner has my life etched into it. If she thinks a forged paper will erase that, she's wrong." For a long moment, I didn't move. I thought of the safe tucked away behind the bookshelf, the hidden will that spelled out the truth. Her forgeries were lies on paper, but the safe held my real defense. My mind sharpened with the knowledge that the fight ahead wouldn't be clean, it would be brutal, but I wasn't stepping down. Starkweather closed the folder, his voice calm but heavy. "You must be ready. This will not be a simple quarrel. It's going to court. It's going public. And when it does, you'll need to stand taller than you've ever stood before." I swallowed hard, the anger settling into something firmer. Resolve. I had lived through harder times than this. Poverty, loss, back-breaking labor. I could live through this, too. As I rose to leave, Starkweather slid the folder across the desk once more. His words landed with the weight of a gavel. "You're not just fighting for your home, Orville. You're fighting for your name." I tucked the folder under my arm, the edges biting into my side as if to remind me of the truth. When I stepped back out into the cool air of Asheville, the streets felt colder than they had that morning. My home awaited, but it no longer felt the same. It wasn't just walls and memories anymore. It was the battlefield where I would make my stand. When I stepped back into my house after leaving Starkweather's office, it no longer felt like the place I had known for decades. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension and were whispering warnings back to me. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind. "You're not just fighting for your home, Orville. You're fighting for your name." I set the folder on the table and looked around, the silence pressing in. Every picture frame, every book, every scratch on the wooden floor told a story, and yet it all seemed under siege. That evening, I sat in my chair, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock. A house that had always been alive with voices now felt colder than winter stone. I couldn't shake the feeling that my battle wasn't confined to legal papers and forged signatures. It was spreading into whispers I couldn't see, shadows I couldn't touch. The next day, I learned just how right I was. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I caught the sound of a hushed voice on the phone in the hallway. It was a cousin of mine, someone who used to call me Uncle Orv with warmth, but her tone was clipped now, cautious. "Yes, I heard. Unstable. They said, he's been shouting at nothing, forgetting names, even violent." I froze mid-step. The words hit harder than any slap. They weren't talking about some stranger. They were talking about me. Jody's handprints were all over those accusations. Her weapon wasn't just force, it was poison, dripping into ears one by one until people believed her story over mine. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to collect the mail. Byron, my neighbor, stood by his fence trimming branches. He used to wave big, sometimes stop for a chat about the ball game or the weather, but that day, he only gave me a short nod, his eyes sliding away quickly. "Morning," he muttered, his tone polite but distant. I raised my hand in return. "Morning, Byron." My voice carried a steadiness I didn't feel. For the first time in years, I realized there was a wall between us, and it wasn't wood or brick. Sunday at church confirmed my worst fears. Folks I had known for decades kept their distance. A woman I'd helped once when her husband was ill shifted in her pew to avoid my gaze. Men I used to share coffee with after service gave curt nods, their eyes filled with doubt. It was as though I had become contagious, carrying some invisible disease they feared would cling to them if they got too close. Walking back to my truck, I could hear snippets behind me. Sad? Really? Losing his mind. Dangerous at his age. I clenched the steering wheel as I sat down, staring straight ahead. Rage bubbled beneath my skin. But so did something sharper, a determination that burned hotter than the shame. Jody wasn't content to humiliate me in my home. She was taking aim at my reputation, at the trust I had built over 70 years, piece by piece. She was dismantling me until there would be nothing left but the shell of an old man too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the folder from Starkweather still unopened in front of me. My reflection stared back from the polished wood, lined face, tired eyes, but still steady. I thought of my son, Darren, sitting silent through every insult, every attack. His silence was louder than any of Jody's words. He wasn't just failing me, he was letting her erase me. And then there was Kelsey, her eyes, darting between us whenever Jody lashed out, told me she still saw me for who I was. She was young, but she carried the weight of truth in her gaze. For her, if for no one else, I had to fight. Just as the sun slipped below the horizon, the sound of footsteps came to my porch. A soft knock followed, then the scrape of paper sliding beneath the door. I waited until the steps retreated before bending to pick it up. The envelope was plain, unmarked. Inside was a single sheet. Family meeting tonight. Mandatory. Jody. I sat back in my chair, the words burning in my hand. A meeting. The kind that wasn't about reconciliation but about domination. I could feel it already, the trap tightening, the walls of my own house closing in around me. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and whispered to myself, "So this is how it begins." When I walked into my living room that evening, I almost didn't recognize it. The chairs had been pulled into neat rows, facing the center like a courtroom. My own home, the place where I had shared meals and laughter for decades, had been rearranged into a stage for judgment. Jody sat upright at the far end, legs crossed, her smile thin and sharp. Darren was next to her, shoulders hunched, eyes already fixed on the floor. A few relatives I hadn't seen in months filled the seats, their faces expectant but guarded, as if they had been summoned to witness a trial rather than a family gathering. I paused by the doorway, gripping the frame for balance. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady though my chest tightened. "Just a family meeting, Dad," Jody answered smoothly, her tone dripping with false politeness. We thought it was time to clear the air. Clear the air. I could taste the irony. This was no meeting, it was a tribunal. And I was the accused. I walked slowly to my chair, the one they hadn't dared to move this time, and sat down. The silence stretched, thick as molasses, until Jody leaned forward with papers in her hand. She began calmly, her words rehearsed. "Orville, we're worried about you. Your memory has been slipping, and your temper has been unpredictable. It's not safe for you to manage this house anymore." I stared at her, letting the words settle. Then she held up a stack of documents, her eyes glinting. "These are proof that Darren and I are better suited to take care of things now. You'll still live here, of course, but the responsibility will shift." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. I knew at once those papers were the same Starkweather had warned me about. The forgeries, neat and dangerous. My jaw clenched. To be treated like a criminal in my own home, with my own family as the jury, was an insult deeper than any wound I had ever known. Before I could respond, a small voice broke the tension. That's not true. All eyes turned to Kelsey. She sat near the back, her hands trembling in her lap, but her chin was lifted. I've seen how you twist things, Jody. I've heard you tell neighbors lies about Grandpa. You said he was dangerous, but he's never raised his voice to me, not once. The room buzzed with whispers. One aunt leaned toward another, eyes wide. Jody's smile faltered, just for a moment. Kelsey, she said, her voice sharp now. You don't understand what's best for him. But Kelsey didn't back down. I understand enough. You pressure Dad until he agrees with you. You make Grandpa look weak when he isn't. You're the one causing this, not him. Her words cut through the air like a blade, slicing Jody's control. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across the relatives' faces. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, as if realizing they had been led into a trap themselves. I leaned forward, my hand steady as I pulled a sealed envelope from my pocket. You talk about responsibility, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs. You wave those papers around as if they mean something, but these... I placed the envelope on the table and tore it open, sliding out the deed and my will. These are the truth, legal, witnessed, and protected. My house, my name, prepared long before you even joined this family. The room erupted. Relatives craned their necks, whispering, pointing. Darren shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. He still said nothing, his silence damning him as much as her lies. Jody's eyes burned into me, her hand trembling as she clutched her forged papers tighter. You think this changes anything? She hissed. You think one piece of paper will stop me? I met her glare with all the strength I had left. This house carries my blood. Jody, my sweat, my sacrifices. You will not take it with lies. The relatives sat stunned, the balance of the room shifting like a seesaw about to tip. For the first time, I felt the weight of truth on my side, heavy but solid. Jody's face twisted, her mask slipping. She slammed the papers onto the table, her voice rising with fury. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Her words echoed in the room long after the others fell silent, crawling into the walls like a curse. I sat back in my chair, my pulse steady. For once, it wasn't me on the defensive. Tonight, the cracks had shown. The morning after the so-called tribunal, my house felt like it was holding its breath. I woke early, though I hadn't truly slept. The venom of Jody's last words clung to me like smoke after a fire, every syllable replaying in my head. This isn't over. You'll regret this. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight filtering through the curtains. The air was still, yet heavy, as if even the walls had absorbed the shame of last night. My coffee tasted bitter, though I hadn't changed the brand in years. Each creak of the house seemed louder, almost mocking. For decades this place had been my sanctuary, but that morning it carried the echo of a courtroom where I had stood accused. I told myself I had defended my name, produced the truth, but the silence around me whispered otherwise. A man can win the argument and still feel alone. Late in the morning, a soft knock at the door broke the stillness. I opened it to find my cousin Martha and her husband Leonard, both avoiding my eyes at first. They stepped in quietly, as if not wanting the neighborhood to notice. Martha's voice was low. We shouldn't stay long, Orville, but we needed to tell you, what Jody did last night didn't sit right with us. Leonard nodded. She was too prepared, too eager to tear you down. It didn't feel like concern. It felt like a performance. Their words were cautious, yet I could sense sincerity. For the first time since the slap, a flicker of hope stirred inside me. So you believe me? I asked, leaning forward. Martha reached for my hand. We don't know everything, but others in the family are whispering too. Some aren't sure Jody's telling the truth anymore. They're uneasy. I let out a slow breath. The loyalty that once seemed to belong to Jody alone was cracking. Small fractures, but fractures nonetheless. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. That means more than you realize. They left quickly, promising discretion. I watched them walk down the driveway, their shoulders tense, as if carrying a secret too fragile for daylight. The flicker of hope burned faintly in me, but I knew better than to trust it fully. Hope without caution was just another trap. That afternoon, Darren came by. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes never met mine. I let him in, waiting for him to speak first. After a long pause, he muttered, "Dad, maybe Jody went a little too far last night." I studied him, searching for conviction, but found only fear. A little too far. She forged papers. Darren, she tried to strip me of my home in front of you, and you sat there. He winced, looking at the floor. I can't go against her. You don't understand what it's like, keeping the peace, holding things together. If I push back, everything falls apart. His words were knives, dulled by cowardice, but cutting nonetheless. I felt pity for him, yes, but mostly a deep, hollow pain. My own son, too weak to stand for me, too bound to the woman who sought to erase me. One day, I said quietly, silence will cost you more than speaking ever would. He didn't answer. After a few moments, he left, shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his choice dragged him down. I stood at the window watching him go, my chest heavy with disillusionment. As dusk approached, another knock came, firmer this time. Byron, my neighbor, stood there, his face lined with unease. Orville, I thought you should know. Folks around town are talking. Word is spreading that you've lost your grip. Some are saying the house is as good as Jody's already. I stared at him, stunned. She's poisoning the well outside the family now? Byron shifted uncomfortably. I don't believe it, but not everyone knows you like I do. Gossip has legs in this town. At church, at the diner, it's being repeated. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. It wasn't enough for Jody to shame me under my own roof. She was reaching for the wider world, chipping away at the one thing I still had left besides the house, my name. I thanked Byron, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. When he left, I remained at the window, staring at the street. A couple walked by, glancing toward my home before quickly turning away. Their whispers carried on the evening breeze. I pressed my hand against the glass. If they believed her lies, I would lose more than bricks and mortar. I would lose the legacy I had built with my own two hands. My fight had only just begun, but now it was clear. The battlefield stretched beyond family walls into the very community I had lived in all my life. I walked into Starkweather's office that morning, carrying more than the weight of my years. The gossip Byron had warned me about the night before followed me like a shadow down every block of Asheville. People I had known for decades looked at me as if I were a stranger, whispers running faster than truth. The brass letters on Starkweather's office door gleamed in the sunlight, steady and sharp, a promise of clarity in the haze. Inside, the place smelled faintly of old leather and dusted books. But nothing about it felt tired. Starkweather himself sat behind a desk lined with neat stacks of files, his posture calm, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. When he stood, he clasped my hand firmly, grounding me in a way my own son hadn't in years. "You look troubled, Orville," he said. "Sit. Tell me what's been happening." I lowered myself into the chair across from him, the creak of its wood louder than it should have been. The family staged a trial in my living room, Jody waving false papers, relatives looking at me like I'd gone mad. And now the neighborhood thinks I've lost my mind. Starkweather listened without interruption, his gaze steady. When I finished, he folded his hands. This isn't just a family squabble anymore. It's a campaign, which means we counter it with strategy. His tone settled the trembling in my chest. For the first time in days, I felt I was sitting with someone who respected me not as a burden, but as a man with rights worth defending. Starkweather leaned back, reaching for the folder I had brought. Deeds, tax records, my wife's will tucked neatly among them. He adjusted his glasses and read silently, page after page. The quiet stretched, but it was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of calculation. Finally, he tapped a page with his pen. "Here," he said. "This clause, your late wife's will, tied half the ownership of this house directly to you, with stipulation that it cannot be transferred or sold without your explicit consent. Not even your children can override it." I blinked, leaning forward. You mean, even if Jody pushes her forged papers, she can't erase this? He gave a firm nod. Correct. As long as this clause stands, you have an anchor. It's a protective wall no one told you about because no one thought you'd need reminding. But here it is, in black and white. Hope flickered through me, cautious but real. My wife, gone all these years, had unknowingly left me a shield. I could almost hear her voice in that office, telling me to stand tall. But Starkweather's expression tightened as he pulled another file from his desk. There's something else. He slid a document across to me. It bore my name, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. A county filing, stamped only days earlier. This is a suspicious attempt to establish power of attorney. If it had gone through, Jody would have been able to make financial decisions in your name. It's incomplete, likely forged. But it shows intent. The blood drained from my face. She's already reaching into the records? Yes. And if she succeeds, she could move money, transfer property, even hospitalize you under claims of incompetence. It's not paranoia. Orville, it's preparation on her part. The fury inside me was quiet, like embers glowing under ash. My jaw clenched. To think my own daughter-in-law would go this far, to not only strip me in my own living room, but to twist the law against me. Before I could speak, a knock rattled the door. Starkweather frowned, motioning for me to stay seated. He opened it to find a courier holding a plain envelope. No sender, no return address. The man left quickly. Starkweather slid it open, unfolded the single sheet, and read aloud, "Stop fighting, or you won't like the next move." The words hung heavy in the room. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. So it's not just whispers. It's threats now. Starkweather's voice was steady, though his jaw was tight. This is meant to scare you into surrender. You cannot give them that satisfaction. The law is still on your side, but we must be deliberate. Every step you take from now on must be documented, secured, airtight. I nodded slowly, gripping the arms of the chair. Fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve, but it could not consume me. Not now. She wants me erased, I said quietly. But she's forgotten who built this family, who laid the bricks of that house with his own hands. I won't walk away. When I left Starkweather's office, the envelope was folded in my pocket, its words a poison I refused to drink. In my other hand, I carried the copy of my wife's will, the clause that could shield me, her voice echoing from the grave. On the sidewalk, people passed by without noticing me, yet I felt taller, anchored by truth. For the first time since the slap, I believed I had a weapon, not of fists, but of law and memory. And if Jody thought I would surrender quietly, she had underestimated the man who still bore this family's name. I came back from Starkweather's office with the city's noise still clinging to me. But once I stepped inside my home, it was only silence that greeted me. I sank into the old armchair by the window, the same one I used to share with my wife on summer evenings. Her photo still sat on the mantel, eyes bright, smile steady. I looked at her picture longer than usual, whispering, "I won't let them erase what you built with me, not while I'm breathing." The house carried her touch in every corner, and the thought of Jody stealing it with forged papers lit something fierce inside me. I swore under my breath that her legacy would not be swallowed by greed. As the dusk deepened, a soft knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting company. When I opened it, there stood Mrs. Caldwell, my neighbor of nearly 30 years. She kept her voice low, glancing over her shoulder as if she feared someone might see her. "Orville," she whispered. "I heard the shouting the other day. Jody wasn't exactly quiet. Folks on this street, they've been talking, but I want you to know I don't buy her story. If you need me to testify, I will." Her words cracked something open in me. For weeks I had felt isolated, as if every voice was stacked against me. Now, here was a neighbor, steady and brave, offering me her hand in the storm. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, using her first name for the first time in years. "I can't tell you how much that means." She smiled faintly. I know what it's like to be cornered by family. Don't let her scare you. You've got allies." After she left, I felt lighter. The walls didn't seem as cold. For the first time in a long stretch, I wasn't entirely alone. Later that evening, as I walked down the hall toward my study, I noticed the door slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it before leaving for Starkweather's office. My pulse quickened. Inside, the lamp still glowed, and on the desk lay a note by the phone. My heart sank as I recognized my grandson's handwriting. The note listed details of my bank visit earlier that week, times, amounts, even the name of the teller. Information only I should have known. I sank into the desk chair, staring at those words. Had the boy been pressured, manipulated, or had he simply trusted the wrong person? Either way, my chest tightened with betrayal. The innocence of youth could be twisted into a weapon, and now Jody had likely used my own blood to carve deeper wounds into me. I rubbed my temples, whispering to the empty room. "Why, son? Why would you hand her the knife she's already holding to my throat?" The study felt smaller, darker, as though the betrayal had stolen its air. Yet beneath the sorrow, anger stirred, a refusal to be undone by whispers or weakness. Determined not to crumble, I made my way to the garage. Dusty boxes lined the shelves, filled with decades of life. Photographs, receipts, old tax records. I dragged them onto the workbench one by one, setting aside every piece of paper that might one day serve as proof. It felt like a soldier preparing for war, arming himself with nothing but documents and memory. The smell of oil and rust mixed with the scent of old paper, grounding me in the reality that this battle wouldn't be fought with fists, but with facts. As I sorted through the boxes, my phone buzzed on the bench. It was a voicemail from my bank. The message was clear. Jody's attorney had escalated the power of attorney request. They were moving faster than I imagined. The fury that spread through me was sharp and steady. She was tightening the noose, but if she thought this old man would surrender quietly, she was mistaken. I went back inside, pulled the fireproof safe from the closet, and placed inside two things: the clause from my wife's will that Starkweather had shown me, and the anonymous threat letter delivered earlier that day. Side by side, they looked like opposing forces, proof of love and proof of malice. I turned the key, spun the dial, and locked it all away. Standing in the dim light, I whispered to the silence, "If she wants war, she'll have it, but not the kind she expects. I'm not finished yet." The courthouse loomed ahead like an old sentinel, its stone steps worn smooth by generations who had marched here to argue truth and lies. I walked beside Starkweather, his briefcase swinging lightly as if the fate of my home and name weren't bound up in the papers inside. My palms were damp, but my stride stayed firm. Across the plaza, Jody and Darren arrived in matching smugness. Her heels clicked sharp against the concrete. His eyes were fixed downward, like a boy dragged along by his mother. Kelsey trailed behind them, biting her lip, clutching her notebook like a shield. Byron gave me a small nod from the steps. I drew in a long breath. Today was the day masks would fall. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with whispered speculation. Jody's attorney rose first, polished and loud, declaring I was no longer capable of making decisions, that I had grown unstable and dangerous. He painted me as a doddering old man, unfit to hold on to property or responsibility. The words stung, but I sat straight-backed, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a flinch. When it was Starkweather's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He simply called Dr. Eileen to the stand. Her calm testimony rang clear. My mind was sharp, my health stable, and while age had bent my back, it had not touched my judgment. She held up her medical records, each page cutting through the accusations like a knife. I glanced at Jody then. Her painted smile faltered ever so slightly, but the tide shifted fully when Byron took the witness chair. He cleared his throat, looked at the judge, then said with steady conviction, "I heard Jody outside Orville's house. She told her husband that she'd take the old man down, even if it meant lying through her teeth." Those were her words. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jody's face tightened, her composure cracking like old plaster. Then came Kelsey, trembling, voice small at first, but every word brave. "I saw Dad hand Mom Grandpa's bank information. I begged them not to use it, but Mom said Grandpa wouldn't fight back." Her eyes filled with tears, but her gaze held firm on the judge. That was the breaking point. Jody sprang up, shouting that they were all liars, her voice shrill, echoing off the chamber walls. The judge slammed his gavel for order, but the damage was done. Her mask was gone. The courtroom could see the venom underneath. When silence returned, the judge's words carried weight heavier than stone. He declared Jody's claims unfounded, her documents fraudulent. He condemned her greed, stating plainly that a man who had worked and sacrificed for decades did not deserve to be stripped of his dignity by deceit. My heart pounded as if every beat was clearing a fog from the room. Darren sat hunched, shame dripping from him like rain. Kelsey rushed to my side, wrapping her arms around me, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Grandpa." I held her close, whispering back, "You saved me." But victory was not just about winning today. When the proceedings ended, I stood, requested the judge's permission, and addressed the room. This house was built with my hands and my wife's heart. I won't see it turned into a prize for fighting over. I'm placing it, along with my savings, into a trust, managed by Starkweather and my granddaughter Kelsey. That way, it will stay in the family, but safe from greed. The courtroom buzzed. Jody's fury burned hotter, but she could no longer touch me. Darren buried his face in his hands. Kelsey looked at me as if I'd given her not just a house, but a lesson for life. When we stepped outside, the sun hit my face. For the first time in months, I felt the air lighten. They had tried to take everything, my home, my name, my place in the family. But I walked out with more than keys or deeds. I walked out with my dignity. And that was something no thief, no betrayal could ever steal.